They tried to remove her from first class until they realized she owns part of the airline. They never saw it coming, a seemingly ordinary passenger, casually dressed yet brimming with quiet confidence, steps into the luxurious first-class cabin. Attendants exchange doubtful glances. There's something about her that doesn't fit the usual corporate lounge mold. Their suspicions grow, and soon an unsettling confrontation erupts. Others watch in shock as the cabin crew attempts to remove her until she drops a bombshell that changes everything. This is no regular traveler. She's part owner of the very airline whose logo gleams on the plane's fuselage. What happens next sends ripples through the entire flight, rewriting the rules of first impressions and respect forever. Alicia Carter was not one to stand out in a crowd. She was tall, with gently curling brown hair that framed her face. Her clothing was tasteful yet understated, a simple black cashmere sweater and tailored jeans. She carried a well-worn black leather tote bag, its handles slightly frayed from years of use. If anyone had taken the time to notice, they might have seen the faint monogram of a designer brand on the inside pocket, but it wasn't obvious. Alicia preferred blending in, staying unnoticed until it was absolutely necessary to do otherwise. For years, Alicia had operated under the radar. Despite owning a significant stake in Delta Airlines, she kept her role mostly private. She had good reasons for this discretion. People tended to treat you differently once they discovered you had money and influence. And that was precisely the dynamic she sought to avoid. However, she still needed to travel frequently for business and to inspect various airline operations around the globe. Her partial ownership wasn't just a vanity investment. She took her responsibilities seriously. That November afternoon, Alicia arrived at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, for a flight to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. She had purchased a first-class ticket, not simply because she could afford it, but because she had an important meeting in Manhattan the next morning. Arriving rested was crucial, and first class on this transcontinental flight offered the perfect environment for her to work, eat well, and sleep without interruption. The moment she stepped into the jet bridge, she sensed something was off. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman named Harriet, gave her a skeptical look. Harriet's glance flickered from Alicia's face to the seat assignment on her boarding, Pass 1A, typically a seat reserved for top-tier loyalty passengers or high-paying customers. Harriet said nothing immediately, but her uncertain expression lingered. Alicia, accustomed to subtle forms of judgment, merely smiled politely and continued down the corridor. In the first-class cabin, Alicia found her seat and placed her tote under the seat in front of her. She had just settled in when an attendant named Cole approached. He was a junior flight attendant, new to the route, and appeared a bit anxious. Cole asked for Alicia's boarding pass a second time, eyeing the worn tote bag and her casual clothing. "Ma'am, I just need to verify something," Cole said, struggling to maintain a courteous tone. Alicia complied gracefully, handing over the pass. She watched as Cole examined it for what felt like an unnecessarily long time, flipping it back and forth as if something might be wrong. He then excused himself to confer with a colleague at the front of the cabin. Though Alicia couldn't hear every word, their furtive glances in her direction told her everything she needed to know. They found it suspicious that she was in 1A. She sighed inwardly, anticipating potential turbulence, but not of the aircraft variety. As more passengers filed into the plane, Alicia tried to busy herself. She pulled out her phone to skim through emails. The hush of the first-class cabin was occasionally broken by the rustle of suits and clinking carry-ons. The overhead bins were nearly full. Flight attendants offered pre-flight drinks, champagne, orange juice, or water, but Cole seemed to have forgotten to extend the courtesy to Alicia. Another flight attendant, named Sophia, older and clearly more experienced, noticed the oversight. "Ma'am, can I offer you a beverage?" Sophia asked kindly, her warm smile a sharp contrast to Cole's tense demeanor. Alicia smiled back. Water would be lovely, thank you. Sophia nodded and disappeared, returning momentarily with a glass of chilled water. Alicia took it, grateful for at least one positive interaction so far, but her moment of relief was short-lived. Harriet, the gate agent from earlier, suddenly boarded and made a beeline for Alicia's seat. "Excuse me, miss," Harriet said sternly. "I need to verify your identification and ticket. There seems to be some confusion about your seat assignment." Alicia calmly retrieved her driver's license and the physical ticket stub. Harriet examined them both, eyes darting between Alicia and the documents. Then Harriet asked, "Where did you purchase this ticket?" Alicia raised an eyebrow. "Through Delta's official website," she said simply. "Is there a problem?" Harriet cleared her throat. "We're just making sure everything is in order. We've had issues with fraudulent first-class upgrades recently. It's a security protocol, you see." Though Alicia knew some travelers did attempt to game the system, the insinuation that she might have done so was irritating. She kept her composure, reminding herself that sometimes people were simply doing their job. But Harriet's body language, the folded arms, the tight purse of her lips suggested this was more than standard procedure. She seemed personally offended that someone like Alicia, dressed down and carrying a battered tote, could legitimately be in seat 1A. The interaction ended with Harriet giving back Alicia's ID and ticket stub, but not before Harriet cast a final suspicious look over her shoulder. As Harriet walked away, Alicia's mind churned. She had no intention of flaunting her ownership stake, but this was verging on harassment. Perhaps it was time to put her foot down, or at least ensure the cabin crew didn't ruin her flight. Alicia decided to wait and see how events unfolded. She had always believed in giving people second chances, especially those who might be having a bad day. Once the cabin door closed, the aircraft began to push back from the gate, rolling slowly toward the runway. Alicia tried to shift gears mentally. She had a conference call scheduled for the early part of the flight, once they reached cruising altitude, and in flight, Wi-Fi was available. Before that, she needed to review the agenda for her upcoming New York meeting. It was an important negotiation regarding Delta's expansion into more sustainable aviation fuel programs. Alicia was a major proponent of greener travel. Her own father had been an environmental advocate, instilling in her a deep sense of stewardship for the planet. That passion partly drove her to take an ownership stake in Delta, pushing from within for more eco-friendly policies. A few minutes into taxiing, Cole reappeared by her seat, his face uncertain. "Miss Carter," he addressed her, eyeing the name on the manifest. "Could you come with me for a moment?" Alicia's heart sank. This was highly unusual, especially during taxi. Protocol dictated that all passengers be seated with their seatbelts fastened. "I'm sorry, but we're taxiing," Alicia said gently. "Is there something urgent that can't wait until we reach altitude?" "I'm afraid we need to speak to you right away," Cole insisted, glancing at the seatbelt sign. He looked around nervously, as if expecting the entire cabin to protest. But aside from a few curious stares, no one intervened. At that moment, the plane halted abruptly. Clearly, the flight crew had told the pilots there was an issue that required immediate attention. Alicia, feeling the weight of the cabin's collective gaze on her, reluctantly unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Cole to the front galley, near the cockpit door. Her anxiety spiked. This was unprecedented. She wondered if there was some bizarre red flag on her profile or a critical security concern. Standing in the galley were Harriet, Cole, and two other crew members. Harriet held up a small stack of papers. "Miss Carter, these are the passenger records for this flight," she began. "Your seat assignment is correct, but we have concerns about the method of purchase. The system shows an unusual payment method, flagged by our internal fraud prevention team." Alicia was aghast. Unusual payment method? I use the same credit card I always do. It's a corporate card for business expenses. That may be so, Harriet countered, but we're going to need you to disembark while we resolve this. It's company policy to investigate all flagged transactions. Alicia inhaled slowly, fighting the urge to assert her authority. She wanted to handle this discreetly, if possible. Look, there must be some mistake. Could you please call your corporate office? They'll be able to verify my credentials. We've already tried contacting them, Harriet said brusquely. There's a wait time. Meanwhile, I'm asking you to gather your belongings. Alicia felt her temper flare. She was an investor in this airline, a member of the board's advisory committee for sustainability, and here she was being asked to leave a seat she had legitimately purchased. Still, she tried to maintain composure. You do realize, Alicia said quietly, that removing me from the aircraft without probable cause could have serious repercussions, not just for me, but for the airline. Cole and the others exchanged glances, the weight of her statement registering faintly. But Harriet pressed on, unwavering. Are you threatening us, Miss Carter? Not at all, Alicia said, meeting Harriet's stare. I'm telling you that you're about to make a grave mistake. Tension crackled in the air. A hush seemed to fall over the entire first-class cabin, though half the passengers probably had no idea why the plane wasn't moving. Alicia noticed that Sophia, the more experienced flight attendant, stood in the background looking uncomfortable with the situation. A voice cut through the silence. What's the hold-up here? It was the captain, a stalwart man named Captain Gerald Phillips, stepping out of the cockpit. We're supposed to be in line for takeoff. Why are we still at the gate? Harriet stepped forward. Captain, we have a potential fraud case with this passenger. She gestured toward Alicia. Company policy dictates. Captain Phillips raised a hand, silencing Harriet. We've got a schedule to keep. And if you're not absolutely certain there's a violation, we can't just remove someone. Do we have any definitive proof of wrongdoing? Harriet faltered. Well, not definitive, but the system flagged. Captain Phillips turned to Alicia. Ma'am, do you have any documentation from your corporate office or a confirmation email you could show right now? That might help clear things up quickly. Alicia reached for her phone. Yes, Captain. Here is the electronic receipt and confirmation code from Delta's website. And here are some emails from my corporate travel department confirming everything. The captain examined the documents. Satisfied, he nodded. This seems legitimate. Let's get back on track. Harriet's jaw tightened, but the captain's authority superseded hers. She stepped aside, looking none too pleased. Captain Phillips turned to the flight attendants. We're a team. Let's make sure we're not inconveniencing a paying passenger with unverified suspicions. Understood? The attendants mumbled agreement. Then Captain Phillips returned to the cockpit. The plane resumed taxiing, albeit several minutes behind schedule. Alicia exhaled, feeling a sense of relief mixed with lingering annoyance. She just wanted to get on with her flight in peace. Sophia approached Alicia gently as she made her way back to 1A. I'm really sorry about all this, Miss Carter, she whispered. I'll make sure you have whatever you need for the rest of the flight. Alicia nodded, grateful, but she could still feel Harriet's glare boring into her from the front of the cabin. Cole avoided eye contact altogether, as though hoping to disappear. Alicia made a mental note to follow up with the airline's management later. While she admired the desire to prevent fraud, the manner in which Harriet had handled the situation was unprofessional and humiliating. Once airborne, the tension seemed to subside, replaced by the usual bustle of in-flight service. Alicia quickly connected to the Wi-Fi and dialed into her conference call. She tried to focus on the negotiations for sustainable fuel solutions, but her mind wandered to the fiasco that had just unfolded. She muted her mic momentarily to address the flight attendant who was serving dinner. "Miss Carter, would you prefer the pan-seared salmon or the grilled chicken?" Sophia asked, polite as ever. "The salmon, please," Alicia responded, forcing a small smile. She switched back to her call, where an industry consultant was summarizing policy changes for carbon emissions. Alicia offered her perspective, citing Delta's long-term interest in more environmentally responsible business practices. Despite the chaos of the first few minutes, she found solace in this work that truly mattered to her, ushering the airline industry toward a greener future. Once the call concluded, Alicia decided to catch her breath. She tucked away her laptop and leaned back in her plush seat, watching the dimmed cabin lights flicker gently. She reminded herself that in just a few hours she'd be in New York. She had important business to tend to, and she planned to meet with members of Delta's board to finalize new initiatives. It wasn't the time to dwell on Harriet's rudeness. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't escape a nagging feeling that Harriet wasn't done. Something about the gate agent's unwavering hostility told Alicia this wasn't just about a potential ticketing issue. There seemed to be an undercurrent of personal bias. Perhaps Harriet harbored resentment toward passengers she perceived as not fitting the first-class mold. Alicia wondered if other travelers had faced similar hostility and how many times Harriet's suspicious mind had turned a routine flight into a stressful ordeal. An hour into the flight, the cabin was mostly quiet. Passengers were engrossed in reading, watching in-flight entertainment, or napping. Alicia was reviewing documents when she noticed Harriet stepping into the first-class cabin. Once again, an unusual occurrence since Harriet was a gate agent and typically wouldn't remain on board. Harriet whispered something to Cole, who nodded and motioned her towards the galley. Through the thin partition, Alicia overheard snippets of their conversation, phrases like background check, unauthorized purchase, and management has to know. It sent a chill down her spine. Harriet was clearly still digging for a reason to prove Alicia didn't belong in 1A. Growing frustrated, Alicia decided it was time to speak up. She stood and walked to the galley, politely clearing her throat to announce her presence. Cole startled, almost dropping a tray of glasses he was arranging. Harriet turned, arms folded, an unmistakable scowl on her face. "Is there something I can help you with?" Alicia asked, striving to keep her tone even. Harriet's eyes narrowed. "Actually, Miss Carter, I'm awaiting further instructions from my supervisor on the ground. We take these fraud flags very seriously." Alicia felt a surge of anger, but tried to remain calm. "And did you inform your supervisor that the captain personally verified my ticket?" "That? I showed him proof of purchase and corporate emails confirming everything." Harriet gave a dismissive shrug. "The captain doesn't have the final say on fraud investigations. If my supervisor confirms that your purchase was legitimate, then fine. But until then, what?" Alicia retorted. "You're going to keep calling me a fraud in front of the crew, possibly in front of other passengers? This is bordering on defamation." Cole stepped in, looking panicked. "Miss Carter, we don't mean to accuse you of anything. Harriet just wants to be absolutely sure." Alicia shook her head. "Look, I'm happy to cooperate with any investigation if it's done through the proper channels, but I'm not comfortable being ambushed or talked about behind my back on a flight I paid for. I'll speak to your supervisor directly if needed." Harriet smirked, as if challenging Alicia to try. "Feel free. I'm just following protocol. I have a responsibility to ensure the safety and integrity of this airline's operations." At that, Alicia locked eyes with Harriet. "Funny you should mention that, because I have that responsibility too, possibly even more than you realize." Without waiting for a reply, Alicia turned and walked back to her seat, her heart pounding. She was teetering on the edge of revealing her role as part owner and board advisor. Yet she still hoped Harriet would come to her senses without forcing a public showdown. Dinner service finished, and the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight. Some passengers settled into sleep, while others watched movies. Alicia found herself too restless to rest. She opened her laptop again, focusing on her upcoming meeting spreadsheets, anything to take her mind off. Harriet's relentless scrutiny. Around midnight, the sound of footsteps approached. Harriet reappeared yet again, this time wearing a triumphant look. "Miss Carter, I've finally heard back from my supervisor," she announced. Alicia closed her laptop, and Harriet waved a small piece of paper. "Your payment method has been verified, but there's still an issue. The name on the corporate card doesn't match your personal name. It's listed under Carter and Green Innovations, LLC. We need verification that you're authorized to use this corporate card." "That's my company," Alicia said, exasperated. "My name is literally part of that LLC, Carter and Green Innovations. I'm the founder." Harriet scoffed. "Anyone can claim that. Do you have documentation showing you own this company?" Alicia took a deep breath, her patience wearing thin. "My business card is in my tote. Let me get it." She rummaged through the bag, retrieving a sleek card that read Alicia Carter, founder and CEO, Carter and Green Innovations, LLC. Harriet frowned but took the card, eyeing it suspiciously. "I'll send a photo of this to my supervisor." Alicia noticed a few passengers craning their necks at the commotion, some with earphones removed. Curious about the argument, she felt mortified. This was exactly the kind of spectacle she dreaded. "Harriet, can we do this discreetly?" Alicia asked, striving for composure. "You're disrupting the entire cabin." Harriet's voice rose slightly. "I'm doing my job, Miss Carter. If you're truly who you say you are, you should have no problem with this process." "Unbelievable," Alicia muttered under her breath. She glanced at Cole, who stood behind Harriet, avoiding eye contact. Sophia was nowhere in sight, likely tending to other passengers or perhaps consciously keeping her distance from the escalating drama. In a swift motion, Harriet turned on her heel, disappearing down the aisle, presumably to send another frantic message to her supervisor. Alicia remained seated, anger mounting. She was tired of being polite. Harriet was overstepping boundaries and humiliating her in the process. One row behind, an older gentleman with silver hair and a tailored suit leaned forward. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you all right?" Alicia turned, forcing a polite smile. "I'm fine, thank you," he nodded sympathetically. "I worked in corporate law for years. If you need any documentation or a witness, I'd be happy to help." "This is quite the inconvenience they're putting you through." Alicia appreciated the gesture. "Thank you. I'm hoping it will be resolved soon." Yet the ordeal was far from over. As Alicia turned her gaze forward, she could see Harriet hovering near the front galley again, phone in hand, talking in hushed but urgent tones. There was no telling what Harriet's supervisor was saying on the other end of the line, but it likely wasn't going to quell Harriet's suspicions easily. In what felt like an interminable hour, Harriet made 2 more trips to Alicia's seat. Each time, Harriet asked for additional proof, bank statements, corporate account details, letters from the CFO of Carter and Green Innovations. Alicia refused to provide private financial documents mid-flight, especially with no official Delta corporate representative present. She was on the verge of demanding Harriet step aside when something unexpected occurred. The plane jolted, a slight vibration running through the cabin. At first, Alicia assumed it was turbulence. The captain's voice came over the PAR system, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a minor technical issue with one of our sensors. We'll be making an unscheduled landing in Chicago for a quick inspection. We apologize for the inconvenience." Groans filled the cabin, and Harriet's face twisted into frustration. Clearly, this diversion would extend the flight by hours, potentially giving Harriet more time to pursue her misguided witch hunt. Elisha, on the other hand, saw a silver lining. Perhaps at Chicago O'Hare, a higher-level Delta official could clear things up once and for all. Then Harriet could no longer wield her perceived authority unchecked. As the plane began its descent, Harriet disappeared, presumably to prepare for landing. Sophia came around to collect empty glasses and ask everyone to fasten seatbelts. She paused when she reached Alicia. "I'm truly sorry," Sophia whispered. Harriet is a gate agent with a certain reputation, but she was short-staffed tonight, so they had her stay on board to handle administrative tasks. "She's been a bit overzealous lately," Alicia nodded. "Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate your kindness. This has been quite stressful, but I'm hopeful it'll get resolved on the ground." Sophia gave a supportive squeeze on Alicia's arm before moving on. Moments later, the cabin lights brightened in preparation for landing. Alicia secured her laptop and personal items, bracing herself for whatever awaited them in Chicago. Once on the ground at O'Hare, the aircraft taxied to a remote gate. Passengers were told to remain seated while maintenance crews came aboard to check the sensor issue. Harriet was one of the first to disembark, presumably to continue her calls. Meanwhile, Elisha felt torn between wanting to resolve the fiasco immediately and not wanting to escalate an already explosive situation. After about 30 minutes, an airline representative named Thomas boarded. He was a tall man in a crisp navy suit, a Delta pin gleaming on his lapel. Making a beeline for Elisha, he introduced himself quietly. "Miss Carter, I'm Thomas Dixon from Delta's Customer Relations. May we speak privately?" Elisha nodded, relieved that someone more senior had arrived. She grabbed her tote and followed Thomas to the jet bridge, where Harriet stood, arms folded, a triumphant expression on her face. Thomas ignored Harriet's smugness and addressed Elisha. "I've been briefed on the situation," he said. "I want to apologize on behalf of Delta if you felt harassed or inconvenienced." Harriet interjected. "We still need to confirm her corporate account status." The name on the credit card. Thomas held up a hand, silencing Harriet. "Miss Carter, I've already spoken with the corporate offices. They confirmed Carter and Green Innovations is indeed your company. They also confirmed your seat purchase and your authorized corporate card usage. There is no fraud, no issue." Harriet's jaw dropped, but the system flagged. Thomas spun toward her, voice sharp. "Systems make errors, and the correct approach is to verify calmly and discreetly. Repeatedly harassing a passenger in first class is unacceptable. I've read the logs of your communications. That is not Delta's standard." Seeing Harriet recoil, Elisha felt a flood of relief, but also a pang of indignation. Harriet had put her through an ordeal that spanned nearly half the country. Now Harriet had to face the consequences. But Elisha didn't gloat. She simply exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Thomas continued. "Carter, given this unfortunate situation, Delta would like to extend a formal apology. We'd be happy to refund your ticket and offer you a voucher for future travel. We also want you to know we appreciate your business." Elisha gave him a polite smile. "Thank you, Thomas. That's a start, but there's something you should know." She paused, locking eyes with Harriet. "I'm not just any passenger. I own a stake in Delta. I've been working behind the scenes on sustainability initiatives. I was flying to New York, partly for Delta-related business, tomorrow morning." Harriet's eyes widened in horror, while Thomas's expression turned to alarm. I wasn't aware," he stammered. "Miss Carter, had I known," Alicia held up a hand. "That's precisely the point. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with decency. What if I were a teacher, a nurse, or anyone else? I'd still deserve respect. Harriet's behavior was abysmal, and I won't stand for it." Thomas nodded, his face solemn. I understand. On behalf of Delta, I once again apologize. Rest assured, we will address this matter with the highest priority. With that, Harriet's face turned beet red, realizing the enormity of her mistake. I'm sorry, she managed, voice trembling. I didn't know. Exactly, Alicia said, meeting Harriet's eyes. You didn't know who I was, but it shouldn't matter. I suggest you reflect on that. Delta's maintenance team soon cleared the plane, citing a sensor glitch that was now resolved. The flight would continue to New York, albeit hours behind schedule. Most passengers remained on board, though some had deplaned to stretch their legs or arrange alternative flights. Alicia walked back onto the aircraft, feeling an odd mixture of satisfaction and residual anger. As the captain prepared for takeoff again, Harriet slipped into the cabin, heading straight for Alicia. She looked contrite, but Alicia wasn't sure if it was genuine remorse or fear of the repercussions she might face for her behavior. Miss Carter, Harriet said softly, I would like to apologize properly. I realize I was out of line. Alicia studied her face. Thank you for saying that. I hope you learn from this. Don't judge people by appearances. Harriet nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. She scurried to the galley, where she would remain out of sight for most of the flight. The cat was out of the bag. Harriet had harassed one of the airline's part owners, an unimaginable lapse in judgment and professionalism. As the plane took off from Chicago, the atmosphere felt significantly lighter. Sophia brought Alicia a fresh cup of coffee, along with a tray of fruit and pastries, just in case you're hungry, given the late hour. Alicia thanked her, touched by the gesture. She tried to rest, but her mind spun with the night's events. She recalled Harriet's unwavering suspicion, the repeated demands for proof, the public humiliation. While part of her felt vindicated now that Harriet understood the gravity of her actions, another part of her felt a sting of sadness. Harriet's behavior symbolized a larger issue in society: how quick people are to judge, how easily appearances can mislead. The plane finally landed at JFK in the early hours of the morning, far behind schedule. Exhausted but determined, Alicia disembarked with the other weary travelers. The airport was quiet, a rare calm that settled in the pre-dawn hours. Thomas reappeared near the gate, waiting to escort Alicia through. "Carter," he greeted, offering a tired but polite smile. "We have a car ready to take you wherever you need to go. Again, I deeply apologize for tonight's events." Alicia nodded, dragging her tote behind her. "Thank you, Thomas. Please keep me updated on any actions you take. Harriet needs retraining at the very least. Let's ensure no other passenger goes through something like this." "Absolutely," Thomas said, handing her a business card. "Here's my direct line. If there's anything you need, or if you'd like to discuss the airline's sustainability initiatives further, don't hesitate to call." Alicia pocketed the card, grateful for the personal contact. She had a full day ahead of her, a quick freshening up at her Manhattan hotel, followed by a crucial meeting with Delta's board members and environmental consultants. Despite the drama, she reminded herself she had important work to accomplish. Later that morning, Alicia sat in a high-rise conference room in Midtown Manhattan, overlooking the Hudson River. She was tired, but her mind was sharp, fueled by resolve. In front of her sat 3 board members, Margaret, Daniel, and Robert, along with several sustainability experts. The conversation began with the usual pleasantries, then shifted to the pressing matters of biofuel partnerships and carbon offset programs. Midway through the meeting, Margaret, an older woman with steely grey hair, looked at Alicia over reading glasses. "We heard you had quite an eventful flight last night. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." Alicia offered a faint smile. "Word travels fast, I see." Margaret nodded. "Thomas briefed us this morning. Rest assured, we take customer experience very seriously. especially when it comes to potential discrimination. Harriet's actions were unacceptable. We'll be reviewing her employment. Alicia considered her words carefully. I appreciate that, but in fairness, Harriet might just need re-education. I don't want her fired if she's willing to change. This might be an opportunity for Delta to emphasize better training around implicit bias. Robert, who had been silent so far, chimed in. You're incredibly gracious, Alicia. Most people would be out for blood. Alicia shrugged. I've learned that firing someone doesn't always fix the underlying problem. If Harriet has never been taught to treat all passengers with equal respect, or if she's operating under certain biases, then that's where training can help. Of course, if she's unwilling to change, that's a different story. The conversation pivoted back to sustainability strategies, but Alicia's words about Harriet hung in the air. It was a subtle reminder that even in an industry as complex as aviation dealing with massive financial transactions, intricate logistics, and regulatory scrutiny, the human element is often the most fragile and prone to error. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. Alicia barely had time to process her ordeal. She approved budget proposals for green initiatives, negotiated with biofuel suppliers, and collaborated with marketing teams on how to promote Delta's new sustainability drive. Finally, on her last evening in New York, she received a call from Thomas. Miss Carter, I wanted to give you an update on Harriet, he began. We've concluded our internal investigation. Alicia sat on the edge of her hotel bed, listening intently. The city lights glimmered outside her window. Go on, she said. Harriet admitted she let personal biases cloud her judgment. She's been placed on probation and will undergo thorough training in customer relations, anti-discrimination, and conflict resolution. We'll be monitoring her performance closely. Alicia felt a wave of relief. That sounds fair. She also asked if she could speak to you personally to apologize once more. But we didn't want to impose that on you. Alicia paused, considering. I think that would be good for both of us. If Harriet is truly remorseful, maybe hearing it directly will help us both move on. Thomas agreed and arranged a call for the following day. When the call came, Harriet's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. She explained that she'd been dealing with personal stress, her daughter's medical bills, and her own sense of insecurity about her position at Delta. She apologized repeatedly, acknowledging that she took out her frustrations on Alicia, whom she perceived as an easy target. Alicia listened with empathy. She didn't excuse Harriet's behavior, but she tried to offer some words of understanding. We all go through tough times, she said, but the solution isn't to project our anxieties onto others. I hope you can learn from this and treat every passenger with respect. Harriet thanked her, promising to do better. Alicia ended the call feeling lighter, as if she'd closed a chapter on a painful but illuminating event. Weeks passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm at least. Alicia's version of usual, which included constant travel, business meetings, and philanthropic endeavors. One day, she received an unexpected invitation from Delta's executive leadership. They wanted her to attend an awards ceremony for outstanding employees and also deliver a short speech about her vision for sustainability and customer service. The event was to be held in Atlanta, where Delta's headquarters were located. Alicia flew in the night before and stayed at a hotel near the venue. On the day of the ceremony, she arrived at a large banquet hall filled with airline staff from across the country, everyone from flight attendants and gate agents to pilots and corporate executives. It was a vibrant, bustling scene. After a series of awards and speeches, Alicia was invited to the stage. She took a breath, stepping up to the podium. As she scanned the crowd, she recognized Harriet sitting near the back, looking both anxious and hopeful. Alicia began her speech. When I invested in Delta, it wasn't just for financial returns. I believed in this airline's capacity for innovation, community, and above all, humanity. Recently, I experienced an incident that tested my faith in that humanity. But rather than let it sour my view, I see it as an opportunity, a chance to reflect on how we can all do better. In my role, I focus on sustainability. But sustainability isn't just about the environment. It's about sustaining relationships, sustaining trust, and sustaining the sense of dignity every passenger deserves. And that starts with empathy, understanding, and the willingness to admit mistakes. Her words resonated in the banquet hall. She caught Harriet's eye momentarily, noticing tears glistening on Harriet's cheeks. Alicia concluded her speech with a call for unity in pushing the airline forward, both technologically and culturally. Months rolled on, and the story of Alicia Carter, the passenger who turned out to be an airline owner, became something of a legend within Delta. Some whispered it around employee break rooms, cautioning newcomers to treat every customer with respect. Others spoke of how Harriet's bias had led to a near disaster for her career. Training modules were updated, emphasizing real-life scenarios like Alicia's experience. In a twist of irony, Harriet became a sort of cautionary tale, but also an example of personal growth. For her part, Harriet took the mandated training seriously. She emerged from probation with a new perspective. Some of her colleagues reported she was kinder, more patient, and more willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. While Harriet would never erase that night's embarrassment, she used it as a stepping stone to become a better professional. Alicia continued her push for sustainability. She spearheaded a new program that rewarded flights using sustainable aviation fuel, partnered with airports to improve recycling initiatives, and even launched a scholarship for young engineers studying eco-friendly aerospace design. All the while, she traveled incognito, avoiding any special treatment. Yet the rumors persisted. Alicia Carter might be on your flight, so make sure you treat everyone well, just in case. One morning, about a year after the incident, Alicia was flying from Seattle to Atlanta. She was in business class this time, quietly working on her laptop. A flight attendant approached, offering a drink. Alicia looked up, surprised to see Harriet standing there, a gentle smile on her face. "Miss Carter," Harriet said, her voice steady. "It's been a while. May I get you something to drink?" Alicia returned the smile, genuinely happy to see the transformation. "Water would be lovely, Harriet. Thank you." As Harriet handed her the water, she took a quick moment to speak privately. "I just want you to know, I've worked really hard to improve. I'm not the same person I was." Alicia nodded. "That's wonderful to hear. Keep going. We can always get better, day by day." Harriet smiled, then continued down the aisle, offering drinks to other passengers with a warmth and kindness Alicia had never seen before. In that moment, Alicia felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond her business achievements. She had seen a real, positive change in someone. Perhaps that was the best possible outcome, transforming hearts and minds, one flight at a time. After deplaning in Atlanta, Alicia made her way toward a meeting with Delta's senior leadership. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Important notice. Board meeting schedule. Revised urgent agenda item." Intrigued, she quickened her pace. Inside the sleek corporate conference room, she found the entire board waiting. At the head of the table stood Margaret, wearing a bright smile. "Alicia, we have news. We'd like you to take on a more public role within Delta. You've quietly championed sustainability and better service for years. But after the Harriet incident, we realize your voice within the company is invaluable. Would you consider becoming our Vice President of Sustainability and Customer Advocacy?" Stunned, Alicia hesitated. She was used to working behind the scenes. Stepping into a public executive role was a daunting leap, But then she remembered all the time she'd wanted to enact change more swiftly, the countless hours she'd spent negotiating from the sidelines. This position would give her direct power to implement her vision. With a slow, thoughtful nod, Elisha answered, "Yes, I'd be honored." Margaret beamed, and the rest of the board applauded. The decision was unanimous. Alicia Carter would now be a visible leader at Delta, symbolizing a future where corporate responsibility, customer care, and environmental awareness could coexist at the highest levels of aviation. Elisha was still getting accustomed to her new office at Delta's Atlanta headquarters, an expansive space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling runways below. It wasn't lost on her how surreal the transformation had been from an almost disastrous confrontation in first class to her appointment as Vice President of Sustainability and Customer Advocacy. She ran a hand over the sleek wooden desk, remembering how only a year ago she'd been fending off accusations of fraud at 35,000 feet. Now, she was in a position to reshape the airline's future, and that felt both empowering and daunting. Looking out at the planes as they glided in and out of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Elisha saw each aircraft as a vessel of possibility. In those cabins, passengers carried private struggles, cherished dreams, and unspoken hopes. Her role, she realized, was to ensure that each person, regardless of status or appearance, could count on a respectful, humane experience when flying Delta. No one should have to prove their worthiness simply to occupy a seat they had rightfully purchased. She glanced at the framed photograph on her desk, a picture of her late father beaming proudly at one of his environmental rallies. She could almost hear him encouraging her, "Never forget the planet you're fighting for, nor the people living on it." That dual focus on ecological responsibility and human dignity fueled her daily work. She saw her father's spirit in every sustainability initiative she championed, and she drew on his unwavering advocacy to inspire Delta's staff about the possibilities of greener travel. The morning's agenda lay neatly stacked in front of her, courtesy of Thomas, who had recently transitioned from customer relations into a more comprehensive advisory role. Among the tasks listed was a meeting with cross-functional teams to finalize plans for investing in sustainable aviation fuel, a cornerstone of Alicia's broader environmental push. Next, there was a conference call with airport authorities on how to implement better recycling and waste reduction programs in terminals nationwide. Later, she'd meet with Delta's marketing division to discuss new branding for the airline's eco-friendly routes, because even the best programs needed clear communication to succeed. Part of her day also involved guiding the new customer advocacy training modules, which had been revamped in the wake of her own experience. These modules included real-life role-play scenarios, sensitivity training, and a focus on recognizing implicit biases, especially in high-stakes situations like last-minute gate checks or seat upgrades. Elisha was determined to eradicate the culture of snap judgments that had nearly ruined her flight that night. As she flipped through the module outlines, she felt a small surge of pride. Harriet's cautionary tale was now part of the training materials, reminding staff that one hasty assumption could not only damage a customer's experience, but also tarnish the airline's reputation. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Your pilot briefing is in 15 minutes, VP Carter," he said, holding up a tablet with the relevant files. "Captain Phillips will be joining to discuss new cockpit protocols for fuel efficiency. Also, Harriet has volunteered to speak at next month's employee workshop. She wants to share her story so others can learn from it." Alicia set down her papers, her expression brightening. "That's fantastic news." Her honesty might go a long way in inspiring others to be mindful of their behavior. The mention of Harriet still stirred a mix of emotions in Elisha: empathy, relief, a touch of lingering regret over how things had once gone so terribly wrong. Yet the fact that Harriet was now actively participating in training sessions felt like a testament to the airline's capacity for transformation. Her story was no longer one of shame, but one of redemption and growth. Indeed, Harriet had embraced her second chance, slowly building a reputation as one of the most understanding gate agents in her district. As she walked with Thomas to the conference room, Elisha took in the sights and sounds of Delta's headquarters. The corridors were lined with posters touting new global routes. Staffers hustled between offices, and the hum of conversation filled the air. Every so often, an employee would stop to greet her politely. Some knew her by name. Others simply recognized her face from internal communications. Elisha responded with a warm smile or a quick hello. These exchanges might have seemed minor, but she saw them as an important aspect of her new leadership style, being visible, approachable, and engaged. Inside the conference room, she took a seat at the long, polished table where Captain Phillips and several of his colleagues were waiting. The pilot, whom she recognized from that chaotic flight, greeted her warmly. "We meet again, Miss Carter," he said with a slight grin. "Under much calmer circumstances, I'm happy to say." Elisha returned the smile. "Agreed, Captain. Thank you for your help that night. It could have gone a lot worse without your intervention." He waved off the praise. "Just part of the job. Now, let's talk about how we can make these flights even more eco-friendly, shall we?" The meeting delved into technical discussions, exploring more efficient flight paths, new software systems that fine-tuned fuel use, and pilot training for operating jets under reduced power without compromising safety. Elisha asked pointed questions, citing both cost-saving measures and environmental benefits. The group decided on a pilot program aptly named Project Green Horizon to test these new protocols on certain transcontinental routes, with the hope of rolling them out fleet-wide if successful. After the meeting, Elisha felt a surge of hope. All these scattered puzzle pieces, employee training, passenger experience improvements, sustainable aviation fuel, more efficient cockpit operations were finally coming together, she thought. Perhaps this was what her father had always dreamed of, a culture shift that valued not just profits, but also people and the planet. As she headed back to her office, her phone buzzed again. A text from Harriet lit up the screen. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to thank you for allowing me a chance to learn from my mistakes. I won't let you or Delta down again." Elisha paused in the hallway, reflecting on the simplest lesson of all, that genuine respect transcends titles, job roles, and appearances. It was a lesson Harriet had finally embraced, and one Elisha hoped to instill throughout the airline. Once again behind her desk, she gazed out at the sprawling runways. In that moment, she felt a sense of profound peace and purpose. There were still challenges ahead: budget constraints, regulatory hurdles, internal skeptics, but the progress made so far was undeniable. With Delta's vast resources and the collective determination of its workforce, meaningful change was within reach. Elisha's fingers brushed over her father's photo once more before she returned to her day's agenda. In the distance, another Delta jet ascended into the sky, its engines roaring, a promise of forward momentum. Yes, she thought, a new dawn indeed. What began as a humiliating confrontation transformed into a catalyst for radical change, both for one determined passenger and the entire airline. Elisha Carter's unexpected ordeal in first class revealed not just a broken system, but also the incredible potential for redemption and growth. In the end, Harriet's transformation showed how empathy and education can bridge the gap between prejudice and understanding, while Alicia's appointment as Vice President of Sustainability and Customer Advocacy proved that real leadership begins with humility, vision, and the courage to stand up for what's right. If you enjoyed this dramatic and inspiring story, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales and motivating narratives. Every like and subscription helps us bring you stories that highlight the transformative power of empathy, perseverance, and hope. Thank you for watching, and stay inspired.